Let's go to number 9. Which of the following principles, if valid, most strongly supports the analyst's reasoning and bias? The analyst says, when Johnson attacked his opponent by quoting her out of context, his campaign defended this attack by claiming that the quote was even more politically damaging to her in context. But those who run his campaign clearly do not believe this. They have since had plenty of chances to refer to the quote in its proper context, but continue to quote it out of context.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah.
In criticizing, yeah,
Yeah,
it
A
would
is
be
the right
A.
answer, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like we did that question before.
Yeah, it's very similar to to an assumption question, but yeah, he says they clearly don't believe this, or they don't believe that the quote is more damaging in context, because if they did believe that, then they would quote it in context. So yeah, just this is really a lot like an assumption question. They assume that political campaigns will pursue the line of attack they believe to be most politically damaging. If that assumption is true, it greatly strengthens the argument. So that's the thing about all these assumption family questions: strengthen, weaken, flaw, sufficient assumption, and necessary assumption. They're all extremely similar in the kind of reasoning they ask us to do. The next topic we're going to turn to is going to be sufficient assumption questions, which are a lot like necessary assumption, except that we're not going to use the denial test on sufficient assumption questions necessarily, where we negate answer choices. We are still going to use mismatch concepts a lot. That will be important throughout the test. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Conclusion of the argument can be properly drawn if which one of the following is assumed. Critic says the recent biography of Shakespeare does not explain what is of most interest about him. It is by an expert on the history of Elizabethan England, and so does a good job of showing what life would have been like for Shakespeare as a man of that time. But it does not explain what made Shakespeare different from his contemporaries. Question stem says, the conclusion of the argument can be properly drawn if which one of the following is assumed. Properly drawn means that it's 100% correct. So the answer on a sufficient assumption question should completely fix the argument, make it perfectly logical. Whereas a necessary assumption question, we were just looking for a statement that the argument really needed, that it couldn't live without. That if you took that statement away, the argument would fall apart. On sufficient assumption questions, the answer is sufficient to fix the argument. It's enough by itself to really make this a logical argument. So in this one, what is the critic's main point here?
I think the critic's main point is that he probably had an average life to other people in England.
Well, let's see.
So it doesn't
it says
really
it does a good
explain.
job of showing what Shakespeare would have been like, but what's he trying to prove about this biography?
That the person is an expert on England, but not really Shakespeare and Shakespeare's in general.
Yeah, so in this case, it's kind of this first sentence, like the recent biography of Shakespeare does not explain what is of most interest about him, because that's what he then supports with evidence. This middle sentence, it says it's by an expert on history, Elizabeth England, and so does a good job of showing what life would have been like for Shakespeare as a man at that time. So he sort of tells us what it does do a good job of doing, admits that it does a good job of showing what his life would have been like, but then says it doesn't explain what made Shakespeare different from his contemporaries. So this sentence down here, it doesn't explain what made Shakespeare different from his contemporaries, is intended to support this first sentence up here. And that's what makes it our conclusion, that first sentence. Biggest clue that's there is that the phrase does not explain appears twice. Does not explain appears up here. Does not explain appears down here. So he's trying to prove what it doesn't explain. And we'll use mismatch concepts to solve it, just like we have on other necessary assumption questions. So what is these, if this is our conclusion up here, the recent biography of Shakespeare doesn't explain what is most interesting about him, and this is our evidence down here, because it doesn't explain what made him different from his contemporaries, what would the assumption be?
The assumption would probably be that what is most interesting about Shakespeare is what made him different from his contemporaries.
Right, exactly, yeah. So it's a mismatched concept, just like we saw on necessary assumption questions. We connect the thing up here from our conclusion to the thing down here from our evidence, and we get our answer. What is this guy assumes that what is of most interest about Shakespeare is what made him different from his contemporaries. That's the way it's starting to make sense. Okay. So yeah, sufficient assessment questions are not super hard. Some of them can be really short, but at the same time also fairly challenging. Like, let's look at this one. It's really, really short, which you would think would make it easy, and it does in a certain way, but it can be kind of hard to figure out, be very tricky. Okay, so the final conclusion above follows logically if which one of the following is assumed. That's another sufficient assumption stem. The conclusion follows logically. It's saying basically which one of these answers fixes the argument, makes it perfectly logical. Okay. And it says the final conclusion. So, what's the final conclusion of this argument? Yeah, the answer is the spirit is perfect. But yeah, the final conclusion is that the spirit is not a material body, right?
Yeah, because everything
that's
else
sort of
is
our
imperfect.
intermediate. Yeah, right. The spirit is not a material body. Our intermediate conclusion is that all material bodies are imperfect. So material body would be our common concept. We said material bodies are imperfect. The spirit is not a material body, so the spirit is not imperfect. The spirit is not imperfect, that means the spirit is perfect. So, yeah, we'll see a ton of sufficient assumption questions similar to yeah, all right. They can get really tricky. Like this one is super short, but also every time I see it, I kind of cringe because it's so hard. Conclusion follows logically. Which one of the following is assumed?
It follows that some students have part-time jobs, do not walk to school. Every student who walks to school goes home for lunch. It follows that some students who have part-time jobs do not walk to school. The conclusion of the argument follows logically if which is assumed. Some students who do not have part-time jobs go home for lunch. Every student that goes home for lunch has a part-time job. I don't know. Some students who do not have part-time jobs do not go home for lunch. Every student who walks to school goes home for lunch. It follows that some students who have part-time jobs do not walk to school.
Yeah.
This is very tricky, actually. Okay.
I know, this is you're right. Like I was saying, even though it's really short,
Some
it's still really
students
hard.
who do not have part-time
walks
jobs
to
do not go
school.
home for lunch.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be either C or D. Would be kind of what I'll rule it down to. So, our common concept is walks to school. So every student who walks to school goes home for lunch. So 100%, if you walk to school, then you go home for lunch. That doesn't necessarily mean that every student who goes home for lunch walks to school, but it means that every student who walks to school does go home for lunch. It follows that some students who have part-time jobs do not walk to school. Okay, so they don't walk to school. Well, if they did walk to school, that would mean they go home for lunch. But since they don't walk to school, that means they might not go home for lunch. So we would say some students who do not go home for lunch have part-time jobs. D is our answer.
D. Some students who do not go home for lunch have part-time jobs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Because we're connecting, we've got walks to school here. Every student walks to school, goes home for lunch. So we've got to connect goes home for lunch to have part-time jobs. But all of these answers, or most of them, contain goes home for lunch and part-time jobs. They just connect them different ways. So we have to figure out exactly how to connect goes home for lunch to part-time jobs. And since we said that some students have part-time jobs don't walk to school, we said, and if they did walk to school, that would mean they go home for lunch. But since they don't walk to school, that means they don't go home for lunch. So we can say some students who have part-time jobs don't go home for lunch, or some students who don't go home for lunch have part-time jobs. Super tricky, even though it's short. Most of them are not quite this bad, but figure out what two concepts you need to connect first. Since walk to school appears twice, that's not what we need to connect. We need to connect goes home for lunch and has part-time jobs, and figure out how you need to connect it after that. Since they don't walk to school, that means they may not go home for lunch. So then we're looking for don't go home for lunch and have part-time jobs. Okay. Let's look at some more of these. Most of them are not quite that difficult. But look at this. The conclusion above follows logically if which one of the following is assumed. Obviously, we cannot in any real sense mistreat plants. Plants do not have nervous systems, and having a nervous system is necessary to experience pain. Okay, so what's the conclusion of this argument?
The conclusion is we cannot mistreat plants.
Right, we cannot in any real sense mistreat plants. Why is it that we can't? This guy thinks we can't mistreat plants.
Because they don't have a nervous system.
Right, and having a nervous system is necessary to experience pain. So, right, only organisms that can experience pain can be mistreated. He's assuming that it's necessary to be able to experience pain to be able to be mistreated.
I think that's probably D.
So, yeah, most of them are more.
Like B is
right,
good,
D is definitely our answer.
But technically, if we put only organisms that have nervous systems can experience pain, I think it makes it too narrow, and then D makes it a little more broad.
And it's not really an assumption. Yes, B is not really an assumption because he states that.
Yeah, he does say that.
Having a nervous system is necessary to experience pain, right? Is kind of the same thing as saying only organisms that have nervous systems can experience pain.
Yeah.
So, so it can't be an assumption because.
So it has to be the connection of pain and being mistreated.
Right, pain and mistreatment. And our conclusion talks about mistreatment, and that's the new concept in conclusion. Since our evidence never discussed mistreatment, we have to connect mistreatment to something for our conclusion to be supported. Okay. Rational finding if assumed allows the conclusion above to be properly drawn. 5,000 of the 50,000 books published in Country Z in 1991 were novels. Exactly 25 of the films released in Country Z in 1992 were based on those novels. Since 100 films were released in Country Z in 1992, no more than 1/4 of them were based on books published in Country Z in 1991. Okay, so what's the sort of final conclusion here?
Okay, that no more 1/4 of the films were based on books.
Right. Exactly. What's our evidence that proves that no more than a quarter of the films were based on books published in country Z and anywhere?
The evidence is exactly 25 films released in country Z and 19 were based on those novels.
Right. We're based on those novels, yeah. So there is sort of a disconnect between our evidence and our conclusion. Does proving that exactly 25 of the films released in country Z were based on novels prove that no more than 25 of the films were based on books?
Yeah, I think that's
Right,
a
so yeah, B is our answer,
tricky
yeah. Right,
wordplay
it's
of
the
books and novels.
Precisely, yeah. The mismatching concepts is between the word novels in our evidence and the word books in our conclusion. It does mention books up here, but then our evidence is really
It
based on the
says
novels, not the
50,000 of the
books.
books were novels.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So they could have
50,000
been
of
other
books
kinds of
published
books.
were novels. So even though books technically does appear in our evidence, it's not really used as evidence.
Yeah.
So books is the concept in our conclusion that needs to be connected to something, and it needs to be connected to those novels. Say that they didn't do any films that were based on books that were novels. Okay.
Oh, it's raining.
Two more of these. All right, which one of the following is assumed allows the conclusion above to be properly drawn? All potatoes naturally contain solanine, which is poisonous in large quantities. Domesticated potatoes contain only very small amounts of solanine, but many wild potatoes contain poisonous levels of solanine. Since most of the solanine in potatoes is concentrated in the skin, however, peeling wild potatoes makes them at least as safe to eat as unpeeled domesticated potatoes of the same size. Okay, what's the conclusion in this one?
That I think it's the last sentence. Peeling wild tomatoes makes them at least as safe as
Right.
as to eat unpeeled domestic potatoes the same size.
Right, exactly. So peeling them makes them at least as safe to eat as unpeeled domesticated potatoes of the same size. What's our evidence that proves that peeling them makes them at least as safe?
Most of the solanine in the potatoes is concentrated in the skin.
Yeah, most of it is in the skin. Okay. And yeah, domesticated potatoes contain only very small amounts, contain poisonous levels, the wild ones do. Okay. So, yeah. On the most basic level, we need to say that our evidence proves our conclusion. We need to say that peeling them actually does make them safe. So let's look at our choices. How about C?
I'm going between C and A right now, but I haven't read D yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's between A and C. There is no more solanine in a peeled wild potato than an unpeeled domestic potato. I would say that might be right. Because based on the conclusion.
That's our answer, right? Because it
says the unpeeled,
but it says that our evidence that it proves our conclusion that if you peel the wild potato, it really is just as safe. And our evidence was about the solanine, since there's solanine concentrated in the skin, but the assumption is that if you peel it, that gets rid of enough solanine to make it equally safe to the unpeeled domesticated potato.
Yeah.
And C basically, points out that assumption. Says that there's not more solanine actually that time. Okay, good work. This one's a little tougher. Which one of the following, if assumed, enables the conclusion above to be properly inferred? So a proper inferent is something that must be true, essentially. You'll see that same term, proper inferred or properly inference, on must be true questions. So which one of these assumptions fixes the argument, makes it perfectly logical?
Okay.
So children fall into three groups: non-tasters, regular tasters, and super tasters, depending on how strongly they experience tastes. Super tasters strongly preferred mild cheddar cheese to sharp. Regular tasters weakly prefer mild to sharp, and non-tasters show no preference. Also, the more bitter food tastes, the less children like it. Thus, super tasters experience sharp cheddar as tasting more bitter than mild cheddar, but non-tasters experience sharp cheddar as tasting no more bitter than mild cheddar. Okay, so what's our conclusion here?
The conclusion are that children fall into three groups of tasters.
Well,
Super
we have
tasters
a thus
experience.
down here, yeah.
Okay, super tasters experience sharp cheddar as tasting more bitter than mild cheddar, but non-tasters experience sharp cheddar as tasting no more bitter than mild cheddar. So regular tasters prefer mild to sharp. Super tasters prefer mild to sharp, and non-tasters don't really care. Okay.
Right. Also, the more bitter a food tastes, the less children like it. So does this evidence actually prove because super tasters prefer mild cheddar, does that prove they prefer it because
it's bitterness?
It tastes less bitter?
So bitterness is the only relevant factor to how strongly children prefer sharp cheddar cheese to mild. Okay.
Yeah, he's assuming that bitterness is the only taste that matters. It doesn't matter how savory or sweet or whatever else they think it is. Bitterness is the only thing that actually matters. Okay, good work there. Kind of a complex one, but still not as hard as some of the much shorter ones, like the going home for lunch and walking to school one.
Maria
Conclusion follows logically.
If it's assumed. Maria won this year's local sailboat race by beating Sue, the winner in each of the 4 previous years. We can conclude from this that Maria trained hard. If Maria trained hard, she would win the sailboat race. Sue is usually faster racing than Maria. It says cheese after that. That's so funny.
Oh yeah, that's from the last question. So what are they basically assuming?
This is very okay. Give me a second. Let's see. Sue did not train as hard. I don't think that is that it. That's what we're assuming.
No. No.
Okay. If Maria trained hard, she would win the sailboat race. If Maria could beat a 4-time winner only if she trained hard. Sue is usually a faster sailboat racer than Maria. So we're trying to connect it to her winning.
Yeah.
And
she won. Sue was the winner in each of the 4 previous years. So therefore, she must have trained hard.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with C.
Right, C, exactly. Basically saying if Maria had not trained hard, she could not have beaten Sue, which means that training hard is necessary to beat Sue. Or that it's a necessary condition to beating Sue is training hard. Yeah, so C is her answer. Okay, let's go back to this one. Yeah, this is more, that's like a strengthened question. Never mind. Here we go. Way too big. Okay, conclusion of what follows logically if which one of the following is assumed. If the budget does not allow for more dairy inspectors to be hired, most of the large dairies in the Central Valley will not meet federal standards governing the disposal of natural wastes, which can seep into streams and groundwater. The new district budget, however, does not allow for the hiring of more dairy inspectors. Consequently, most of the district's drinking water is likely to become polluted. All right, so that's our conclusion. Most of the drinking water is likely to become polluted. Why do we think that it's going to become polluted?
If it doesn't allow for more dairy inspectors, they're going to dispose
Most of large areas in Central Valley will not meet
into the
disposal
groundwater.
of natural wastes. Yeah, right. And we're not getting more dairy inspectors. So therefore, it's going to become polluted. Okay. So, right. On the most basic level, we need to say that our evidence proves our conclusion. Yeah. So, not that. Yeah. So yeah, between A and D.
Okay. Most of the drinking water is likely to become polluted if large dairies in the Central Valley do not meet the standards for disposal of natural waste. If most of the dairies in Central Valley meet federal standards for disposing waste, it's unlikely that the district's drinking water will become polluted.
Yeah. Right, so D is our answer, yeah. A is a very common wrong answer type. It's proving the obverse of what we want to prove. We want to prove what will happen if they don't meet the standards, which is that the district drinking water is going to become polluted. A is about what will happen if we do meet the standards.
Yeah.
And says that if we do meet the standards, it won't become polluted, which is a different conclusion than what we're trying to prove. Yeah, so D is our answer. Right there. Let's see. This one is kind of tough. Conclusion follows logically if which one of the following is assumed. When a resource's price reflects its full cost to society, consumers pay directly for externalities, the unintended but harmful consequences of society using a resource. Further, the price of a resource deters misuse of that resource only if it reflects the resource's externalities. So, since sound management of a resource requires that the price of the resource deter its misuse, it also requires that the price reflect whatever unintended harm to the environment the use of that resource causes. Okay. So that's basically our conclusion. It's that sound management of a resource requires that the price reflect whatever unintended harm to the environment the use of that resource causes. And what's the other evidence that proves that sound management of resource requires that the price reflect whatever unintended harm it causes?
Further, the price of a resource deters misuse of the resource only if it reflects those.
Yeah. Okay. Right, that's the best way to deter it. And I guess we want to deter it. Okay, so clear choices. Okay.
Maybe it's this.
Which one? Oh.
When setting a resource's price, it's possible to forecast completely and accurately all of the effects using the resource.
Yeah, I feel like that would be a better answer for a necessary assumption question. Like maybe that's an assumption that we need, but I don't know if that's the the assumption that will fix the argument. Let's see. So let's track through the concepts. When a resource's price reflects its full cost to society, consumers pay directly for externalities, the unintended but harmful consequences to a society of using that resource. Okay. And then down here in our conclusion, it also requires the price reflect whatever unintended harm to the environment the use of that resource causes. So yeah, that brings us to A. Whatever constitutes unintended harm to the environment also constitutes unintended harm to society, right? Because it's sort of a subtle change in concepts between the evidence and the conclusion. But externalities are the unintended but harmful consequences to a society. And from that, we conclude that we need to have the price reflect unintended harm to the environment. Well, does harm to the environment harm society or not? So A does that for us. So even on some of these questions that seem really tough, the real mismatch between the concepts is subtle like this. Unintended harm to the environment versus unintended harm to the society. Two different concepts that are very closely related. It's not quite the same. Okay. Let's look at another one of these. Conclusion of the activist's argument follows logically if which one of the following is assumed. The activist says any member of the city council ought either to vote against the proposal or to abstain, but if all of the members abstain, the matter will be decided by the city's voters. So at least one member of the city council should vote against the proposal. Yeah. Conclusion is that at least one member should vote against the proposal, a recommendation telling us what to do. And why does he think that at least one member should vote against it?
Because they don't want it to be decided by the city.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very good intuitive spotting of the assumption here. He doesn't want the voters to decide it. This argument only makes sense if our activist is for some reason against democracy or against the voters deciding what happens. Okay. This one. Which of the following, if assumed, enables the conclusion above to be properly drawn? I promised Bernie that I would answer his question. He asked me whether his project had been approved. I misunderstood and thought he had asked whether I had approved it. I said, truthfully, I would approve it if I could, but I don't have the authority to do so. That is up to Dorothy, and she hasn't yet made a decision. Thus, I fulfilled my promise to Bernie. Okay, so what's his conclusion? Yeah. He fulfilled his promise to Bernie. And why does he think he fulfilled his promise to Bernie?
Because he said he would answer his question.
Yeah. And did he answer his question?
Technically. But really...
Yeah. Well, right. So I think the assumption would be that technically answering a question is truly answering a question or something like that. Or, I mean, he answered it in some ways. He gave him the information, but he also didn't understand it. So you could say he assumes that it's not necessary to understand a question to answer it or something like that. So yeah, you kept A, right? B, that's not it. So yeah, no, it's not about responsibility or explaining decisions.
One need not to fulfill a promise in order to do the best that can be done to fulfill it. No, making a promise.
Yeah, we're trying to prove that he actually did fulfill the promise. So, yeah, an assumption about one need not fulfill a promise is not really relevant. So, yeah, it's A. Right. Because he did give him the information that was requested, and if he did that, then he answered the question. And if he answered the question, then he kept his promise. Yeah. A couple different ways you could come at that assumption. Maybe he assumes it's not necessary to understand the question. Maybe he assumes that all you have to do to answer a question is give the information. Okay, so we're out of time for today. but I'm going to send you a couple of exercises on sufficient assumption questions that you can work on.
Okay.
Beginner to intermediate and advanced. After that, we will move on to inference questions. So I may go ahead and send you a copy of the lesson for inference questions, so you can take a look at that for next time. And when do you want to schedule the next session for?
Let me look at my calendar real quick.
Okay.
Today is the 15th. I would say Thursday should be fine.
Okay, Thursday, and I can do my Thursday afternoon. I can do anytime after 2. And I can also do in the evening on Thursday. What time would be best for you?
Thursday at 2 should be good.
Okay, let's do 2 o'clock in the afternoon. All right. Sounds good. I've got that scheduled. And I'll send you those exercises in just a second.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right, great. It was good to see you. Have a good week.
Bye. Hi, guys. Yeah, I'm alone in my office right now. I'm doing LSAT tutoring. I just finished. Thank you. Thank you for all the compliments. But yeah, so I'm just doing LSAT tutoring. I go live 2 times a week doing LSAT tutoring for anyone that's interested in going to law school or learning about the law school process. I'm so sleepy. I have bags under my eyes. I feel like I'm so tired. I have not been getting enough sleep lately. But yeah, all this art is mine. Thank you. I didn't make all of it. Some of it I bought, some of it I made. Do I like Mina, guys? I don't know what that means. But do I like mean guys? I don't like mean guys. No, I don't like mean guys. But yeah, that's cool. Please subscribe, like my stuff. I just posted a new YouTube video, so go check it out.